Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kendra Matthews, a senior product marketing manager at Conversica, and I'm joined by Amanda DePaul, a marketing consultant and a former Conversican. Amanda, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
In keeping with the RevNext game day theme, we've picked Mad Libs. You remember that game where you picked a random word to complete a story? Well, we think executing on a nurture strategy can often feel like that. Identifying when to offer which assets, how to best segment your audience, how to design the most magnificent engagement programs, and then build the workflows. But in the end, you're not necessarily getting the real responses that you're looking for. Conversational AI can help you fill in the blanks of your nurture strategy. Today, we're going to help you understand how to complement your existing nurture strategy with conversational AI. So what is conversational AI? It's a technology that enables people and computers to communicate to each other in a two-way personalized dialogue that mimics the natural back and forth of a conversation. Leveraging conversational AI enables marketing and sales to scale personalized outreach beyond anything they can do today, generate real dialogue with the audience, and move leads through the funnel faster than ever before. This personalized dialogue helps drive better engagement, which we all know drives better revenue. So before I kick off the conversation with Amanda, I want to take a moment and tell you a little bit about Conversica. So Conversica is a conversational AI solution. In fact, we are a pioneer in the industry, having been around for 13 years. Conversica AI assistants help organizations attract, acquire, and grow customers at scale across the entire customer revenue lifecycle. So what does that really mean? Our AI assistants act as digital team members working alongside your marketing, sales, and customer success teams to engage prospects and customers in human-like two-way conversations. AI assistants complement their human counterparts with persistent and personalized engagement, offloading many of the routine and repetitive tasks required to increase participation in events, qualify leads, set up meetings, even communicate product enhancements, just to name a few. But not all AI solutions are created equal. When it comes to AI, experience matters. The sophistication of the AI engine and the maturity of the learning models equates to better outcomes. Conversica has a 98% accuracy rate with over 1 billion interactions. And our 3,400 AI assistants have generated over $20 billion in revenue for our customers. So now that I covered a little bit about Conversica, let's bring this back to conversational AI and how that helps drive better engagement. So Amanda, what is engagement these days anyway?
I think that, engagement has taken on a new life form in recent times. I think before we really thought about engagement as engagement with our campaigns, and you measure that by looking at opens on your emails and clicks on your links and visits to your website, and maybe form fills, and you call that engagement. And I think that we don't think so much about engagement from the perspective of actually generating real dialogue with our audience. And so when you talk about like email nurture, for example, you're not talking about any semblance of like a reply rate, because how often are we getting replies on our nurture emails? I would say that's pretty rare, especially when those nurture emails are like HTML based and they're pretty, but they don't necessarily drive someone to hit the reply button. They maybe drive someone to click a link and maybe fill out a form or maybe consume a piece of content, but that's really only giving you like a clue as to if that person is like a real person and maybe is interested in your product. It's not necessarily generating any kind of like tangible conversation with that person. And so I think, there are a couple ways to think about engagement, but I think we have to move into this kind of like universe where we're thinking about engagement in the way of generating dialogue with our audience and not necessarily just measuring their behavior.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that one of the things that Conversica has done is on an annual basis, we do this survey that really talks about kind of the 4 Ps of what we consider effective engagement. You want to talk through those for us?
Yeah, I think as marketers, we put together these campaigns and we drive the engagement in the way of that behavior-based engagement, the clicks and the opens and things, but we really rely on sales to drive the dialogue part. And so we say to sales, hey, we've got a sign of life here. Now it's your job to really take this over the finish line. And the reality is that to do all of that effectively and to actually do it in a way that generates a conversation is a lot of work. And so we measure all of these companies that we kind of secret shop against these 4Ps. And these 4Ps are really kind of like categories that if you were to execute against them flawlessly, you're probably going to generate some sort of actual response from your audience. But the reality is when you look at kind of the results in how we interacted with all of these companies, not many are doing it in a way that is going to generate that conversation. And so when you talk about persistence, we're talking about how many times have we been reached out to before, to generate a response. And we know it takes a lot, over a dozen touches to get any kind of response from a lead or a prospect. And we were finding that people were kind of bailing after one or two attempts, which is human nature, I think. I mean, you definitely chase the warmest lead as a salesperson. And if you get a response, you're going to abandon kind of everything else that you've been working on to prioritize that response. The next one, with slow response times, I think this is a big one. I think this has always been a big one, but I think now with, pandemic and COVID times, we're doing everything digitally. We expect a response pretty much instantaneously when we put in an inquiry for literally anything. And so if it's taking what we found up to 9 hours for us to get any kind of response, that's plenty of time for me to hit Google and go look at your competitor. And then maybe your competitor reaches out instantaneously and I completely abandon the idea that I even wanted to talk to you in the first place because I'm in instant gratification mode as a consumer, B2B or otherwise. The next one, personalization, I think is really challenging for people because it involves research and time. And we find that, personalization, you really have to have at least 5 elements of personalization in an email in order to generate like interactivity from your audience. And a lot of times, 70% of the time, we found that those emails were not personalized at all. So not even like a hi first name, which we're all pretty accustomed to seeing, right? So when you don't even have that, and then you're just kind of sending out a form letter, people don't want to engage with form letters and robots. Like we're really craving like human interaction, I think, at this point, and we want to be felt like we're talking to an actual person who's trying to figure out who we actually are. And then lastly, this is one that I think we don't really think about enough, is where does that email even go when you are following up with somebody? So does it actually get into the primary inbox in front of the eyeballs that you want it to get in front of? Google tries to help us with all of these folders and tags and flags. And that results in a lot of our emails sort of ending up in these sort of black holes in email land. And so even if you nailed persistence, promptness, and personalization, if your email isn't getting to the primary inbox, then it's all for nothing. So, there are a lot of factors, a lot of gating factors to success here. And we really put it all on sales, I would say, as marketers. And we say, well, we gave you the record, we gave you the lead, they clicked an email. So now you go forth and conquer and do all of these things and make magic happen. And the reality is it's sort of an unfair, I think, ask to sales to do that flawlessly every, 100% of the time.
Exactly. No, I completely agree. And, now that we've kind of expanded on how we can look at engagement, not just on, clicks and some of the traditional things, but true conversations, what role do you think the nurture programs play in our engagement strategies moving forward?
Yeah, I think, nurture still plays a really important role. Nurture really has to take on, driving brand awareness, brand recognition. The more consistent you can get in front of your audience with consistent branding and consistent experiences, I think the more likely they are to then come to you later, and also more likely they are to respond to said sales email if they know who they're interacting with. And, you know, it also is really important in moving people along in their buying journey, I think. And so, you know, we're all familiar with a buying journey. We're all familiar with mapping content to your buying journey and making sure that you're serving the right message at the right time. And so I think that those things are all really important still to do, because you're still going to be able to measure and understand where somebody is potentially in their decision making process, so that you can still kind of like figure out when to drop the personalized outreach on a lead and expect it to have like the biggest impact, right? So I think that it is still super relevant, and all of these retargeting programs and nurtures and all the things that we do as demand gen people are still really important, but you have to use all of that not necessarily as like a driver of quote pipeline. Like it's not necessarily going to be, oh, they clicked an email and now they're magically an opportunity. You have to use all of that as your kind of detective work, I guess, to figure out when to really go all in on your outreach to your prospect.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, really having that drumbeat and making sure that we're keeping that message in market is critical. But, you know, how does conversational AI complement that activity?
Yeah, I think that it's nice because this is kind of the Mad Libs part, right? Where there's all these gaps in our process, and ops people really want to plug up those gaps. And so at any stage in the funnel, you know, you could have a lead or a contact, you know, drop out, right? Like they stop engaging, they don't register for your webinar, they don't sign up for your event, they go completely dark. And you're kind of a little bit helpless in that. You just have to kind of keep peppering them with information and hoping that maybe something will stick. And the nice thing is, you know, you can use conversational AI to help you get more out of the programs that you're running, or the processes that you already have in place. And so a good example of this is like a webinar process, for example. So at Conversica, even we use this kind of play for all of our webinars, where we're kind of using that behavioral information that we get from how somebody is interacting with something like a nurture track in our marketing automation platform to then conduct like more personalized outreach throughout that process. So in this example, you know, we've got our kind of traditional 2 to 3 email invite track for a webinar. And a lot of times people will engage with those emails and then not register. And so we take in, you know, okay, well, they open the email. I'm going to then trigger some outreach from the conversational AI or the AI assistant to try to actually close the deal on that registration. And so in this case, somebody opens the email, they don't register. We fire off, you know, the AI assistant chimes in and says, hey, I saw that you know, we're having a webinar. You saw that you might be interested. Can I send you the link to register? In this case, the lead says yes, and then the AI assistant reaches out with the actual link, and its job is done. And then, you know, once that registration happens, it passes that, you know, back to the marketing automation platform. We fire off all of our confirmation emails and our reminder emails. But in the midst of all of that, we also put the AI assistant on trying to get more information from the lead prior to the webinar actually happening, and instilling some sense of almost like ownership or participatory ness. I don't know, it's a bad word, but we want to drive like participation in the webinar. We want people to feel like they're part of it and not just showing up to like listen to somebody talk at them for 30 minutes. And so we reach out and we say, you know, are there any questions? We see you're registered. Are there any questions that we can make sure that we get answered for you on this webinar? Like participate in our content on this webinar. The lead responds with, yeah, I have this question. And we say, and the AI assistant says, okay, great. We'll make sure we get that answered for you. We'd love to debrief with you after the webinar and make sure that your questions are answered. Is there a time that works? And I think this is nice because we always are telling our SDR teams, you know, don't hit up the leads prior to the webinar. It's kind of weird. Like they haven't actually participated yet. It's very like jumping the gun, but this is a great way to kind of like drive participation and also get a feel for how interested are you actually in our product versus just like the content. And so then, you know, obviously we have our reminder email and our it's time to log in email that fire out from the marketing automation platform. But this is just like a good example of how conversational AI and your kind of traditional programs can work together to drive better, real, true engagement, not just clicks, but registrations and attendance and follow up. working together to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical to note that, this is being done together. So they're kind of tag teaming and it's without, having to burden the SDRs at all. So you're increasing your participation without having to add any work to the SDRs, which is great. So, one of the last things I want to just dive into is how can you get to a high level of personalization at scale? Is conversational AI the answer to that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it helps take a lot of that off your plate. There are a lot of things you can do for personalization just out of the box with marketing automation, but it still involves a lot of lift. And so you're still having to map a bunch of tokens and do a bunch of segmenting and doing all of that kind of legwork to make personalization happen. And even then, it's really reliant upon how clean your data is in the first place. And so I can't tell you the number of times that I've received emails where my title is like something super random and weird because whatever I put in the form that I filled out was junk, right? Or they used my company name, but it's my old company name. Like I'm at a new company now. And so they're referencing the last place that I worked. And so you're really kind of relying on, you're putting a lot of faith in your data. And if you are blessed to have a super scrubbed, clean database, then I guess tell us what what Kool-Aid you're drinking, but that is not the case, I think, for most people. And so you really want to be able to have control over the situation, but you also don't want to have to do all of that heavy lift to make it happen. And so with Conversica specifically, we have this conversation editor where really the AI and the tool is doing all of the legwork for you and crafting the email, crafting all 6 of the emails, and writing all of those drafts and making them sound normal and like a real human is reaching out. And then we just kind of give it the context. So we say, hey, here's the name of the event, here's the date of the event, here's what happened to the lead or whatever. Plug all of that in, and the AI really takes it from there, and it uses all of that context to make sure that those emails make sense and that they're relevant, and the timing is all pre-built in, so I'm not having to build a bunch of complicated workflows to make sure that those emails are even going out. And then on top of that, maybe you've done all of that even in your marketing automation platform, but if somebody actually does respond, who's picking up that response? A lot of the times that's like, an ops person or me or, whatever. And so then you've got to do all the work to get that response over to sales, and figure out, make sure it's being followed up on, and it's all very manual. And in this case, the AI is really going to kind of like take it away. So even if somebody does respond, maybe it's not something that warrants even sales' attention yet, it's going to handle that conversation until it's ready to really hand it off to a human. And that all happens without any legwork, prep work up front.
Yeah, and I think that, that really tees up the next section, which is, how can conversational AI augment your workforce? You really hit on it right there, which is these responses are now filtered and the next best action is being taken. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, having managed SDRs in my lifetime, there are a lot of competing priorities for SDRs. And there are it's a high turnover team a lot of the time. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're growing in their careers, they're moving up and on and out. But you've got to have that air cover for the business, right? Like you have to have consistent outreach on your database, on the leads that are qualified, and make sure that that outreach is, aligned to your messaging and it's correct. And you really are trying to just like take all that burden off of the SDR team. And it allows you to make sure that you're training up your SDRs so that they're truly like ready to go out into the world and conquer your leads, rather than just kind of like throwing them in because you need the air cover. And so it really takes that burden off of the SDR team. And I think secondly, we talk about all of these different things that they have to do, those 4 Ps alone. You've got 150 leads you have to follow up with today, and doing all of that, well, is almost impossible. And so we want our SDRs to be, and our AEs, frankly, to be following up with leads that are ready for a real conversation. We want, when you call them, for them to pick up the phone. We don't want you to like burn out on your 50 dials a day and go home. And so it's almost like having sort of like an SDR for your SDRs, which I think is all SDRs' dream, is to have an assistant of some sort. And so this just helps kind of like, prioritize even further beyond sort of like your traditional lead scoring or what we do from a marketing perspective.
Yeah. And, engagement is one aspect of this, but where the rubber meets the road is what kind of successes, what kind of results can you expect from conversational AI? And here at Conversica, we actually track a couple of key metrics. Engagement rate, which really is customers or prospects that have responded, right? So it's not just a traditional click through, but it's a response rate. And then hot leads are actually leads who have had a dialogue with the AI assistant and are ready to actually schedule that meeting with the sales team. You want to talk? I mean, these numbers are really good. You want to talk about how that kind of relates to the industry?
Yeah, I think that these engagement rates are real responses. So when we talk about click rates, sometimes our click rates look like this, and that's just a click. And that doesn't actually really mean a whole lot, right? And so these engagement rates are real responses. They might not be positive all of the time. It might be a no thank you, which is okay. I'd rather get a no thank you than radio silence, because if I get no thank you, I can put you somewhere else and revisit you later. And I don't have to waste my time anymore trying to reach out to you. So that engagement rate in the way of actual responses is huge. And then I think the hot lead rate is even more impressive because you're not generating hot leads out of your email outreach as it stands when you're just doing regular old nurture in the way of real people who want meetings, unless you're like literally putting like, book a meeting here. If you're relying on your nurture emails to drive real like meetings and conversations, you're probably not getting them. So these are real responses with real people who want to talk. And then the last piece is the days to hot. And I think that's the other big kind of piece of the puzzle where we're not relying on a nurture email to go out every 2 weeks and 6 months go by and finally you're a hot lead. This is like less than 2 weeks or less than a week in some cases from day that the lead has actually entered your database to day that it has decided it wants a meeting. And so I think that velocity piece is also huge because that's going to be what ultimately drives more pipeline faster.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to note that through these conversations with an AI assistant, they're doing some pre-qualification. So even if you're doing a book a meeting in your, marketing automation tool, the reality is anybody can book a meeting. They may not be an ICP. They may not meet some of the minimum requirements that would warrant sending it over to sales. And so these are actually high quality leads that are getting over there. We all know that one-on-one conversations really deliver the best results. It's just really hard to consistently and cost-effectively engage with leads at every stage in the customer journey. And that's where conversational AI and specifically Conversica's AI assistants come in. They can augment, your marketing team, your sales team, your customer success team to deliver that personalized engagement at scale, and they can touch them across the entire customer journey. We've covered quite a bit here today. I hope it's clear kind of how your organization should start to consider conversations over clicks and really put a level of focus around engagement. Amanda, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up the session?
Yeah, I think just one final thought is just around, like all of this stuff from an operational perspective is really cool and fun to play with. But I think at the end of the day, we as demand gen people or marketing people really are trying to create good experiences for our prospects, good brand interactions, like positive experiences. And so the more personalization and the more right time communication you can drive, I think the better that experience is for your audience. And so using conversational AI with, your traditional kind of programs and nurture options is really what is kind of creating that really fun, positive brand experience for your audience, which is ultimately going to be what drives demand for your business, beyond even form fills and clicks and leads. So that is probably the biggest takeaway for me.
It really is. It really is. So we really appreciate your time today. Don't forget to check out more about our solution at conversica.com. And thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks.